Welcome students to the online NPTEL course Contemporary Architecture and Design. In the previous class of all these classes, we discussed modernism with focus on architecture, and we have also discussed industrial design and art movement which flourished around modernism with the context of architecture and how it was related with architecture and what was the principle of modernism and in architecture and as well as in design and art. So now we will start with the postmodernism. So it was not that there was a particular timeline from there all the modernist thought process ended and all of a sudden postmodernist thought process emerged. So it was a gradual transition and it was a reaction of against different modernist movement, and also this transition happened because of the context, social context of the world, and we have also seen how it was linked with the world scenario and how from the industrial evolution many of the first phases of modernist movement was an manifestation of industrial revolution. For example, for the machine movement and against the machine movement and all this, so which started in Europe, and after that there was the World War started, and during the World War there was functional emphasis was more during the World War, and during the situation where people started migrating from village to the cities, high rise started coming, and for example for that reason functionalism started evolved in Chicago, and also colonialization for not just for World War, colonialization started in Europe. That's why Bauhaus and other kind of building was there where the functional requirement was just needed because there was many other colonies to taken care of, and then there was thought of that one particular style will go around the international throughout the international, so internationalist movement started. And after the end of the World War there was emphasis, much more emphasis on the aesthetics, because during the World War there was a very clean and minimalist thing was there which focuses on functionalism. And during the World War also we have seen in design there was a requirement of change, that's why modularity came, which later in the after post-war Japan evolved and evolved as a metabolism, and brutalist design also started coming. So all these things were happening during the World War, during the modernist movement. Now postmodernism from 1980s onwards, so if we look at the timeline, so everything started and ended around 1980s. So it started around 1920 will be here, so this is pre-modern, and then 1980s this modernism ended. So from 1980s, so during this time, so after the World War to this, there was a transition between modernism to postmodern. So now after 1980s all this postmodern movement started, and this postmodern movement was against the concept of minimal. So most of this modern movement, and if we look at, so especially internationalism and many other movements, there was very rectilinear, less in ornamentation. Sometimes the ornamentations are just the structures, for example shell and tensile, and sometimes it is just the pure color and pure material in brutalism and as well as the Bauhaus and internationalism, and sometimes the design is just the outer skeleton or the surfaces in context of metabolism. But in postmodern there was high on ornamentation. Ornamentation was really important, and the building started looking much more garish and much more exaggerated in ornamentation in postmodern, and the thought process was very different, and many of the postmodern movement was a reaction against a particular modern movement. So now we will discuss, so this is the timeline of modern. Now we will discuss how modern movement, how postmodern movement was opposing one particular thought process on particular features of modernism. So today in this class we will discuss about with the example of architecture. In the later class we will discuss holistically with industrial design, example of industrial design, and art movement. So in architecture we will today discuss how modernism and postmodernism, what is the difference between modernism and postmodernism in a in totality. But many of the cases it will be because within the modernism there were many movements, so it was just modernist as an idea, holistically as an idea, and postmodernist holistically as an idea. Within postmodernism also there are many different movement which was not connected with each other. For example, critical regionalism and deconstructivism, if we take them, so both happened in the postmodern era. So deconstructivism is in the later phases of the postmodern, and they are not related to each other. In the historicism, also one of the movement of postmodernism, they are also not related with the both of this other postmodernist movement. So conceptually together, but there is a salient link, cohesion between postmodernist style and modern style. What are these? So that we will see with the example of architecture today, and then later with the example of art and design. So architectural features in postmodern in a very broad way. It is after modern, so it's 1980s onwards, and I already told you that what was the situation, variation of the socio-cultural context between modernism and postmodernism. Their socio-cultural context was very different from modernist movement and postmodern. So world right now we are in a stable world. Till now we are in a stable world, so no world war is happening after 1980s. So the situation and looking at towards art and design and architecture was very different in postmodern era. So reaction against the oversimplicity of modernism. So together if we look at modernist movements are simplified. So when we look at the postmodernism right now and the other movements of postmodernist elements, so these postmodern movements are not simplified at all. So if we look at compare these two, postmodern movement will look much more accentuated and has a lot of more visual element in a particular design. Popularism over abstraction and purity of modern architecture. So modern architecture has this concept of pure design, and design has to be based on pure color, pure material, and the vision will come from architect. And then popularism was there in postmodern. So postmodern will imbibe the people's choice, so a lot of elements will there, and to please people, and pastiche, or this is the term which talks about the taking inspiration from others already done work, and then create imitation of that. So these imitations were there in the postmodernist movement. And also in the postmodern era we will see a lot of emphasis on the core design and the emphasis of people's or the users' opinion within the design. So it also definitely there in the metabolism, because metabolism started in a very late phase of modernism, and it's also metabolism, brutalism, and tensile and shell has a lot of features of postmodernism already imbibed in that. So because that's in a transitional phase. So this modularity, concept of modularity, and changing the design based on people's choice is there in the postmodern era. So also people will connect with the design, so that is why context is very important. So people will understand that design belongs to my area, so that affinity towards this design will be is given much emphasis than the pure form of art which was there in the modernism. Now eclecticism and contextuality and history which was there connected in the postmodernism. And if we look at the modernist movement, most of the modernist movement was very abstract and non-figurative, and most of the modernist movement, none of the buildings apart from the Chicago movement, no modern movement had the connection with the previous historic building. So this the history was cut down from this modernist movement. Just only in Chicago movement, which was in the early phase of modernism, it was there, because they have taken inspiration from the Greek architecture style. But apart from that, none of the building has taken inspiration from the previous architecture's building and translated into their own design. But in postmodern architecture movement, it was done extensively. So this particular term is called pastiche in fraternity of art world. So this word means so already done work is acting as an inspiration, and you are mimicking the artwork. So there's a mimicry of that same artwork is done in the design. And eclecticism is a term which combines, which connotes that many of the source is influencing your design. For example, in modernism, so if there is a particular source of design is there, Roorkee House is an example of prairie architecture. So they have taken prairie grassland as their inspiration, and no other inspiration was there. But here in eclecticism, it can be many inspiration, many things are combined together like a collage, and then final design is there. So it can be inspiration can be from one particular space, and another inspiration board can have some other element in the design which might not have seemingly might not have a connection, but then it can be jumbled up and taken as a together as a design inspiration or mood board, and then a design can evolve from these two particular different source of work, and that is called eclecticism, from taking inspiration from different things and making a collage of design and then creating the own design. So that was not there in the modernist movement, and in the most of the cases the modernist movement did not take inspiration from outside. So now the difference between modernism and postmodernism, we will discuss this, modernism in this side and postmodernism in the other side. So there was a pure form and basic geometry in modernism. This is the building we have discussed in internationalist movement. This is Barcelona Pavilion by Mies van der Rohe. This is in this is a pavilion for the Germany and designed in Barcelona. So here and also in the François House and the Johnson House, we have seen pure form, which is cuboid, and rectilinear forms are there. But when you look at this is a later phase of postmodernism and deconstructive style. This is designed by Frank Gehry. This is a Guggenheim museum in Bilbao, Spain. So if you look at the elements, so there's a lot of different elements, which is none of the elements are pure geometric elements, and they are turning and twisting, and that creates the form of the building. And this is by looking at it, you can understand this is not minimal at all, and all this none of these elements are pure geometric, and there's a mixture of curvilinearity with the rectilinearity. So here you can see a rectilinear angle. Now here you can see another rectilinear angle, but in between there are curves, and there are many curves, and rectilinearity are juxtaposed and fused together. So there are a lot of elements are creating this design. So there's no one particular thing, whether it will be just curvilinear or rectilinear, it is blended with each other. And then there's a fenestration, there's a fragile fenestration, which is glass, that is also turning and twisting, and there's a solid, so solid and void, everything is mixed together and then creating this form. This is Frank Gehry's one of the famous concept, which we'll discuss later when we discuss this. So this is Wall House 2 by John Hedgeduck. John Hedgeduck have designed many wall houses. So this is number 2 of the wall houses. Here also we see the complexity of the form. So one thing is just a pure rectangle that is acting as a backdrop, and then on the foreground there's different different curvilinear forms are going like that, and then there's the strip windows, and then there are different kind of windows. There's a straight line in the window, there are punctuation in the window, and then there's a window which is changing in this horizontal direction. Generally in the window it's like the flat horizontal lines will be just flat, but here it is a curve on this axis and as well as in this axis. So there is a curve in this axis because of the wall, and also there is a curve in this axis. So there is a lot of curves and on the backdrop of a particular straight rectangle. And there's also different colors are used. This is not a pure color because it's the purple and all this tertiary and different colors are used on the backdrop of a gray color. Now there's in the modernism, there's purity was also there in form of color and texture, which is white, black and pure basic colors were used mostly in the modern era. So and we have not seen colors like purple, pink and other kind of different sap greens we have not seen. Mostly it was yellow and blue and white and gray and black, and the color of and texture of the material. For example, if we look at Roorkee house, it was just brick, so the color of brick was there. If we look at the examples of Lecture Drive apartment, it was just steel and glass, and it was painted white and black. And then in the brutalism and metabolism, it was just the color of the material, and sometimes brown was used because this was also, brown is one of the neutral color shade which we consider in the color tone. So these were the color was there in the modernism. And postmodernism has a lot of experimental colors, like for example we see purple and blue and this kind of yellowish orange is there. And here in this Dolphin Resort in Walt Disney Center in designed by Michael Graves, we can see orange and different shades of orange, sap greens, which is, this is not a pure green which Frank Lloyd Wright used as a green, which is and also used by Le Corbusier in Chandigarh. So that kind of green is not it's not there. So this is a mixture of different tints, and the sap green is there. And if you look at the form, so all these are not abstract form, these are much figurative forms are there. This will definitely not be there in the modernist movement. Now pure material was there in the modernist movement. We have not seen a cladding of a material or is there. So what is the material of construction was exposed like that, and sometimes it can just be plaster and pure color is there. But cladding and facade treatment was one of the important features of postmodernism. And so what cladding does is, cladding creates a mimicry of a different material and hides the original material. So original material was not shown, rather than that a different material is being shown, and it looks like a different material. And this is also gives the image over realism. So here we, in the previous example, this is all cladded material. So this is not the metal which is not the structural metals, so the structure is hidden within that. So this metal cladding is just a facade treatment, and it's giving a texture of a different material which is not used as a construction member of the material. So as in this cladding, so this is creating a different look of the building. And this building, this is a Portland Public Service building by Michael Graves again. This looks like a gift box as a building. This building does not look like a building because of this kind of ribbons and this colors which are different colors. But this is within the building, this is the same brickwork is there, same construction concrete work is there, but because of this color and different stone cladding and different colors of plaster, there was a different look is given. We have seen cladding in the Art Deco movement, which was in the pre-modern. We have seen this metal cladding in Chrysler building, but later in the most of the modernist movement, the high modern movement on the later phases, we have not seen cladding, and the material was shown as it is. And in the Chrysler building as well, the cladding was also confined into the ornamentation, because it was supposed to look like the metal. That was the philosophy of the design. And the gargoyle's wing and the gargoyle only had the cladding, but most of the building does not have that cladding. And metal was the concept of cladding was different in that, because it wanted to show metal as the texture, because metal was one of the important texture in art deco. But here the concept of cladding is different. Here the concept of cladding is to hide the material and create a different look in postmodernism. And another difference between modernism and postmodernism is abstraction. In modernism, there was an abstract connotation, and there was an abstraction from this nature, or the way of dealing with element was different. So in falling water building, the abstraction comes from the nature is getting abstracted in the building. So this solid and void of nature is translated in the solid and void of the building, and then gradually it diminishes. And the same material of the metal nature is also percolated here, and then there is an abstraction and continuum of the nature. Now the abstraction can also come from of a particular previous history. So only in this Chicago movement we have seen a connection with the history, but the rest of the cases it was not. But the abstraction was done in the form of design, where the column and solid and void was there, taken from the column, and then the three elements of this Greek architecture. But here in the postmodern, abstraction was done in a different way, and it was much more eclectic. So here in the abstraction, one particular thing was taken and then it got abstracted, but here it was in a different approach. So it was eclectic. The two concepts were there, eclectic and pastiche. We have discussed that. So why this is eclectic? Because this is a design by Charles William Moore. So he designed the Piazza d'Italia in New Orleans, USA, and he wanted to create Italy in USA. So you have taken all these elements of Italy. So if you look at the plan, when we will discuss this, we will also show you the plan. So the plan, this kind of water body, this looks like an Italian peninsula which comes within the Mediterranean Sea. So this is the Mediterranean Sea, and Italian peninsula is there in the water body. If you see from plan, you will see, and there are different arches are there which is taken from Italy. So this is a flying buttress. So this is another different arch from a particular place, and then the various different arches are taken from and combined with each other, and also the plan of Italy and the arch and everything is taken together. And also there's so this is also the concept of eclecticism, because there's taking from different things, and also pastiche, because this is mimicking a previous work and taking it there to in the design. And also mimicry is done in a different way. So this is the face. So this also takes the concept of gargoyle, and from there the water spout comes out from the gargoyle's mouth, which was there in the European, and even in some Indian context we have seen water spouts comes out of a animal's mouth. So here he have made the face, and this face is actually Charles William Moore's own face. So it is designed like his own face, and from there the water is coming from his own mouth. This is also a mimicry of creating a funny element into the design, and this kind of things are there in the postmodern movement, so that the people get attracted in a different way, and a lot of different colors are also used, which is not there in the modernist color palette. Now the way of abstraction also can be seen in the hollyhock design, where the hollyhock flower is getting abstracted in a very pure geometric way, and the abstraction here in this postmodernism is not geometric. It can be very in a different way, and also it can be mocking something. For example, this in this building, if we look at the next thing, so this is taking from the expression of a wall which is of columns, which is like Doric, can be a Doric column, but this Doric column is much more short, and Doric column is like a male column and Ionic is a female column. So this is like a Doric column, but this is short. So this short Doric column is like a dwarf main. So this is acting and here he have connected this short Doric column, which is a male column, which is there in many Greek buildings, are like dwarf males, which is coming from this Seven Dwarfs story of Walt, which is there in the Walt Disney building, which is designed by Michael Graves. So this folklore of Seven Dwarfs story is translated into the Doric column, and these are the seven dwarfs. Character of Snow White is there, so the 6 and then another one is here. So this is getting this is actually an irony, and this is called this element of irony is there in the postmodern movement. So in many of the cases, this woman or men will be there as a column in Greek architecture, Greek and Roman architecture. So that has been translated in a different way. So this is eclecticism and pastiche is there in the design. But the way modernism had translated translated the earlier movements like history, they have also taken inspiration from the Greek architecture, but their translation was abstraction of the history into geometry. But here it was irony and gimmick and other things, and they have not abstracted into pure geometry. They have changed it, and then eclecticism and pastiche is used in the way they have seen the history. Now in modernism, one of the key design attribute and the phases was internationalism and monolithic. There we have seen there won't be any contextual connection. In monolithic architecture also there was no contextual connection, we have seen in Marina City. So all the facades are same, though one side is facing Marine Sea. And the Lakeshore Drive apartment, we have seen this, like there was no context, and context does not change the building, and it will be a box and with the pure material. And so as in the François house by Van der Rohe and the Philip Johnson's Johnson house, it is all glass, and whether it is in so it does not take any inspiration from the outside, but it's like a curtain wall. So wherever you put the glass, so it takes it just takes the facade of this, you can see it, so it just acts as a wallpaper. That is the only connection. But here in the contextual design, critical regionalism, we have already discussed, we started this talking about critical regionalism in Dhaka Parliament's building, how Louis Kahn have taken the texture of the eastern part of Bengal in the formwork of this bamboo was taken, and then how the water is playing a major role in the around, it's like a fortress around the water is simplified in his building. So there is a fortress which works like which looks like his design looks like a robust fortress, and then the water around the fortress is the water which is there in the Bengal. And also the way Le Corbusier have translated in his Chandigarh, and as well as I Am Ahmedabad by Louis Kahn has translated the Saracenic arches into their design, is also contextual. Now this Awaji Amibutay Conference Center and Church on Water by Tadawando is also a critical regionalist architect. So the Church of Water is taking the context of this water into the building. So the water, this church, the cross is on the water. So there's a much more connection with the inside and outside of this building. And this terrain land is translated into the geometric abstraction, and this the building blends with the terrain of the land. Now another example of this Lakeshore Drive apartment by Van der Rohe, which was just a glass box around this lake shore of this shore of a lake, versus this building which is done by Mario Botta, which is a wellness center in Switzerland. These are the skylights which is only visible from the building. So buildings are this is Switzerland, most of the time it's snow cladded, but this building is actually, if you look at the building, blends with the landform, the contour of this of the Alps. And also this acts as a Alps terrain, and also because of this, this is not a one particular slope, and the slope changes because of this kind of trusses. The slope changes and it gives a more organic look, and it blends with the terrain form. And if you look at the skylights, which are exaggerated and protruding out of this building, and the building is not visible, only the skylights are mostly visible in from outside. So these skylights acts as a coniferous trees abstraction. So, and if you look at the skylights, they are different from each other because the trees are organic elements and they are different from each other. So one skylight is like this, another skylight is like this, and these elements which is going from the middle acts as a coniferous trees stem, and then it looks like a pine tree which blends with the surrounding. So that is taking the context of the surrounding into the building, so which was not there in the internationalist in the modernist internationalist movement. Another difference between the modernist movement and postmodernism is in modernism structure, in the tensile structure and shell structure, the structure is visible. And that is how it will be aesthetically. Structure will create the aesthetics. We have also seen in some other examples like IIT Kanpur's IIT Kanpur's this library building by Kanvinde. We have seen the structural elements are visible, and that's how, and you, from outside you can see how the load is flowing. So this is in this Washington's Dulles Airport by Eurosarin, and you can see this how this load is load is flowing from here. But here in the postmodernist movement, you cannot see how the load is getting flowed, and there was a dilemma, and there will be irony within the design. So the irony within the design is, so this is a fort's bastion. This looks like a fort's bastion, but it is not a fort's bastion, because fort's bastions are the structural elements which holds the fort, and this is a major structural element, because this fort's bastion will be the supporting element of this fort's main wall. Now if the bastion is broken from within, and you can see another element, so it is not taking the structural load, it is just a free gimmicky wall which is giving an illusion of a bastion, but this is structurally from within, this is not taking any structural load. So this is a freestanding wall, and because it's not complete and it cannot take the load, because the thrust will be from here, and if you break it, so this is not taking the structural load. So this is the irony, which is Wexner Center of Arts in Ohio State University, but by Peter Eisenman. And another of Peter Eisenman's design, so there was the floor plates was all tilted, but within that the floor plates was, within the building the floor plate was straight. So we'll discuss about this building, but from outside it will look all tilted. So this gives a visual illusion of what is not there. So visual illusion of a different element of, or the myth of something which is not there. The truth is hidden in some hidden by something which is not visible. So here in this design, it's the same building, these are the columns which comes within the staircases, and because this is deconstruction and everything flow is not following a particular order. And here this is a column are supposed to take the load from top to bottom, but this column is just hanging, so it is not passing any load. So this looks like a column, but it's not passing any load. So that is also an irony. So irony and everything which is there in the postmodernism, which is not there in the modernism. Modernism will show how the structure load is following. Even in the tensile structure's beauty is how the structure loads are getting followed from our tensile members and how this is hanging. So this is how the tensile structures will look like, and you will see how the loads are getting flowed, but here it will tell you something else, but actual thing is not the truth. So we will also see look at the examples of design and art movement, how modernism and postmodernism was different in those domains, and later on we'll after that we'll start discussing on different movements of postmodernism. Thank you.